Welcome! We are in chapter 2, and we are here on one of the most important chapters of the entire quarter, self-concept. I want to give you a brief explanation of a few concepts from chapter 2 that will help you both with the homework assignment regarding the self-concept bag project, as well as your participation work for Aquila and the Bee and the Dove Real Beauty video. So, first of all, self-esteem and self-concept are very important because if you think about it, they influence everything. A brief example could be maybe you feel like you're a runner, but you're a bad runner. You don't have high self-worth when it comes to your running. So what can happen? You don't run as well because you're letting your brain control you. But when it comes to relationships, low self-esteem and distorted perceptions of ourselves can impact how we deal with conflict, our word choices, how we react to emotions, what we decide to share or not share with our partners. So this is a very important chapter. So first, let's talk about the difference between self-concept and self-esteem. Self-concept is who you are and how you see yourself. It's very important to recognize it is subjective, not objective. So what that means, it's your opinion, it's your viewpoint. It's not necessarily 100% fact. The other important piece to understand is that self-esteem is different than self-concept. Self-esteem is how I feel about myself. This does not guarantee success if I have a positive self-esteem. It's also important to recognize that you can have different levels of self-esteem dependent on different roles. So I might have more high self-esteem as a teacher and lower self-esteem as an athlete at my CrossFit gym. So I want to just cover a few more concepts to help you get ready for your participation work. So I'm going to scroll ahead. People with high self-esteem have a list of traits that is generally the opposite of those with low self-esteem. So you can see here that people with higher self-esteem, they're okay accepting viewpoints from others. They're able to defend themselves in any situation. They perform better, maybe in things like public speaking or a soccer game. They're likely to think well of others, and they tend to evaluate themselves more favorably. But you can also think the opposite if you have low self-esteem. So you can see here, just reverse everything that I said. Now there's just a few more traits I want to talk about and connect this to. Self-esteem is very closely related to self-fulfilling prophecy, but they're different. Self-esteem can affect my self-fulfilling prophecies. Let's pause there and take a look. Self-esteem has a cycle. I can have high self-esteem or low self-esteem. I get positive thoughts or negative thoughts. That influences my behavior, which reinforces certain thoughts. So I don't feel like I'm a good runner. I can't run that fast. I don't run that fast, and therefore, see, I knew I wasn't a good runner. Now, this cycle of self-esteem impacts self-fulfilling prophecy. So here are the traits of self-fulfilling prophecy. There are 4 stages. One is when we hold an expectation for ourselves or others, so we can impose prophecies on other people. The second step is that we behave in accordance to that expectation. The expectation then comes to pass, and it reinforces our original ideas. Very similar to self-esteem, but here's the difference. You see here where I'm holding an expectation, maybe it's for myself. My self-esteem will impact the expectations that I have, okay? So if I have low self-esteem when it comes to being a fast runner, I will then hold an expectation that I won't win the race. What happens? I usually behave like that. My self-esteem is low, I don't have a high expectation, so I won't win the race. It comes true, and then it reinforces my original idea. So while self-esteem and self-fulfilling prophecy are similar, they are also different, but they greatly connect and impact one another. I'm going to skip through a few slides now and just cover about 2 more traits that I want you to know. Bear with me as I start scrolling. Okay, we've already covered self-imposed prophecies and prophecies imposed by others. I'm going to skip biology. Please review that in your text. And I want to briefly talk about reflected appraisal and ego boosters and ego busters. Then we'll stop there. So reflected appraisal, you'll be looking at this a lot when it comes to your self-concept homework bag. Reflected appraisal basically means that the way we see ourselves and our identity is impacted by our communication with others. So for example, my parents, I was very lucky, they were very positive. They had a good influence on me, and I really loved school. And so they always told me that I could be smart in school and that I was intelligent. And so when I was in school, I started to see myself that way as, I guess, an academic. And so I thought, well, my parents think that I can do well in school and they see me as an academic kid. So I see myself as an academic kid. For another example, I had a previous student whose parents were both really good golfers, and they got her to start golfing and imposed this idea that I think you could be really good at golf, it runs in the family, and you could be a great athlete in this sport. What ended up happening? She was golfing on the Green River golf team. So this isn't like a magic wand where someone says, you will be this, and you turn into that. But what reflected appraisal is saying is that we are impacted by messages that we receive in our life. And while right now I'm using pretty positive examples, it doesn't always go this way. And unfortunately, what can happen is we can have negative influences on us that distort our perceptions, meaning it causes us to think perhaps lower of ourselves or that we're not capable, and we don't see ourselves for the great beings that we really are. I want to bring up one more concept here, and that's ego boosters and ego busters. This can have an impact on our overall identity, and I want you to think about this especially when you are watching the participation video for Aquila and the Bee. So ego boosters and ego busters, they're people or events or actions that have an influence on us and impact how we see ourselves, including our identity and our self-esteem. So for example, let's say you get an A on a quiz. That's a great feeling. That's an ego booster. It probably gives you a little boost in your self-esteem and you feel good at school. An ego buster could be just the opposite. You study really hard for a test and you end up not doing so great. But I would say, in my opinion and in my experience as a teacher of interpersonal communication, the worst types of ego busters are people. Those are people that say things to us that hurt us, whether intentional or unintentional. They push us into perhaps more negative self-esteem, and they might have us question ourselves. I'll give you an example. The other day, I was accepted into a competition at my gym. I was very excited about it. Unfortunately, one of my gym mates said the only reason I got accepted was because there weren't that many applicants for the competition. That really hurt me, and it made me question whether or not I was strong enough to be in the competition when I know I am. That's what I'm telling myself, right? I'm trying to get rid of that ego buster and say, no, 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 I am going to work on my self-esteem, but with an already low self-esteem, it's hard. So when we have lower self-esteem, if you recall from that chart or the list, it says that we have a harder time defending ourselves. So if we're already feeling low in our self-esteem and then we get an ego buster, oh, it can be really hard to come back from. So those are the main concepts I want you to think about today. We've covered self-concept, self-esteem, ego boosters and ego busters, and reflected appraisal. Some of the other things in here that we haven't had a chance to talk about include social comparison as well as cognitive conservatism. Please review those in your book and let me know, as usual, if you have any questions. You'll be looking at social comparison in your Dove Real Beauty participation work, and I invite you to review cognitive conservatism in your text. One quick example from cognitive conservatism, since I have one more minute, I want you to think about it in the sense that we have a self-concept that's relatively stable. It grows, it can change, but when someone challenges our identity, we tend to back away. So for example, one of my friends is a comedian and she hangs out with a lot of other comedians. They both all think they're funny and they support each other in that particular field. It makes sense. They are pushing each other to be better comedians, they have similar interests, but they also reinforce their identities as comedians, not challenge it. We'll stop there for now. What you need to do is please review your homework, please review your participation work, and make sure you do your reading. I look forward to catching up with you soon. Thanks!